Hey, Lindsey, fine. Welcome to Bereave Studios.
Thank you. Thanks for having
Uh, yeah, I mean, thank you. Incredibly generous of you to be here to share your story a little bit. The goal of this podcast is to build community through shared experiences, and today this is the story of your journey. Um, you and I have gotten to know each other a little bit over the past couple of years. I think mostly through sales leadership stuff.
Yeah.
And then when you learned about what Bereave was up to, you were incredibly quick to reach out to offer support and help to share. Your generosity was pretty unmatched. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, can you talk a little bit about you said, "Hey, Justin, would love to join this podcast that you're doing." Curious what made you say yes to that?
I mean, I think you spoke to it. The piece of community with something like grief is so massive. And I found it to be so necessary going through my process. And if I can share anything that I learned along the way, it's always something that I want to give back and do because it's truly an experience that you can't even imagine until you're actually going through it. And
Right.
no one can tell you how you're going to feel, like you're in the thick of it, and then if you have community or people that you can go to when you are there, it's just invaluable, really.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like you were through your experience, you learned the power of being around others with a shared experience, and this is your opportunity to kind of almost give back in some way. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you're here to talk about your dad, Neil,
Yeah.
right? And kind of uh, let's just start with uh, an overview of the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So this actually starts like long ago, back in, I
Okay.
don't remember when it was, but when I was about 12 years old, my dad and I were at the grocery store, and I'll set the tone with my dad. Played football at Clemson. He was a big guy, like,
Mhm.
and we were walking out of the grocery store, and a car was pulling up into a parking spot, and we were basically on the sidewalk, and I don't remember this. There's pieces that I do remember, but my dad shoved me out of the way. And at that moment, there was this car that was pulling into the parking spot, drove through my dad, drove him through a brick wall into the grocery store. So I had just lost my grandfather the week before, and that was his dad. And now I'm looking at my dad sitting on a pile of debris, 12 years old, and just in total shock. And the reason I tell you this story is because it leads up to, where this last part of the journey started. So, as you can imagine, after being hit by a car, he had like massive issues with his back. 6 months later, he was in an accident with an 18 wheeler where the 18 wheeler hit him in between, or hit the bed of the 18 wheeler, knocked my dad off the road. So this was all in a matter of like less than a year. So for the next like 10, 15 years, my dad struggled with issues with his back. So in 2013, he had a spinal fusion. And after the fusion, his back was much better. But for a while, like he lost a significant amount of weight and always kind of attributed that to just the whole surgery and that process. Fast forward to, I think it was like early 2014, he was sitting at a red light and he got hit from behind.
Jeez.
And this experience sent him to the hospital. Fortunately, he was totally fine, but they did, scans on him, and um, then they sent that to the surgeon who performed like the fusion before. So my dad went to check in with his surgeon a week later, you just make sure everything was fine because it was maybe 6 months after, less than 6 months after his fusion. And so his surgeon then said, did they tell you that you have a mass in your stomach? And he's like, what? And that had not been mentioned. And he was released from the hospital, and you could very visibly see it on scans and the x-rays
Mhm.
and things. And so then, that started. He started doing chemo. He had a successful run of this. So he had a stomach cancer. It was a carcinogenic cancer. I don't know exactly what it was called, but it was pretty mild in all things, relatively speaking. But he beat it, and he was healthy by like middle of 2014, end of 2014. So fast forward to 2018, and he went in to get his, I think at that point it was like the 5-year check, and they discovered that he had pancreatic cancer. And I'll never forget when he called me and they said, "Hey," my parents called me and they said, "Hey, we're going to come by the house." And they lived about 30 minutes away. So that wasn't completely abnormal because they could have been, in Austin having dinner and they would just stop by. My dad is terrible at keeping secrets, like just
Mhm.
terrible.
Mhm.
And they walked in the door, and my dad was just like, "I have pancreatic cancer." And I fortunately was holding my son because I, you know, felt the urge and the need to drop to the floor. And I just remember this feeling of like, this isn't a stomach cancer. I mean, that is a death sentence. And this was in August of 2018. And my dad was a super loyal person. Um, we urged him to go to MD Anderson, which is, world renowned, which was in Houston. We were in Austin, and that would have been like a drive, like 4 hours or 3 hours. And he didn't want to go, and he's wanted to stay loyal to his surgeon who helped him beat the previous cancer. But we all know pancreatic is super aggressive, and like we had contacts at MD Anderson, and he chose not to go. And I remember, really wanting to try to push him to go, but it was like, okay, if he feels comfortable with his doctor here, we'll like continue down that path until we feel like maybe it's not the right path. And then so this was in, August. He started treatment in September, and in November it had spread. The treatment was making him super sick. He couldn't handle it. Um, the the cancer spread pretty aggressively. And I remember at Thanksgiving he pulled me aside. He's like, "Listen, it spread, but we're going to go to MD Anderson now." And so he went to MD Anderson at the beginning of December, and like the whole plan there was to go in for a consultation and then get on their books and get going. But they point blank said, like, "You are too sick to do this." And he
Mhm.
in MD Anderson for like 2 weeks, didn't even do the consult because he was like jaundice and really, really sick. And then came home for Christmas because he didn't want to be there for Christmas, and
Sure.
um, went back to the hospital and never came back. So he passed like the 2nd of January 2019. So he was diagnosed in August and passed away in the 1st of January.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Uh, I mean, I just learned a ton about uh, your dad
Yeah,
in terms of saving his daughter
yeah,
from a crash and having the whether it was the athletic prowess or uh, the alertness or the fact that he's just a dad just got you out of harm's way. And uh, I mean, what a guy for being able to do that. Um, and then the um, I mean, kept taking it on the chin, right? Accidents,
yeah,
uh, two cancers. I mean, what a
yeah.
seems like he is and could have been a great model for strength for sure.
Absolutely.
Um, you talked a little bit about as we were chatting prior to today. I've talked a little bit about um, the impact of community, right? That it had on your ability to grieve in the way that you needed to grieve. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it's interesting, and I think everyone has been there at some point when you know someone who has um, had a loved one pass away, and you
Mhm.
know, there's a lot of things you can say, and there's a lot of things that you can't and shouldn't say, but really, at the end of the day, no one really knows what to say,
Mhm.
um, and everyone is in such a different part of the process. So, you know, you have my mom, who was this was her best friend and husband of 46 years. Her experience grieving is going to be totally different than mine. Um, so then there's me. You know, my dad and I were super close, and and it wrecked me. And
Mhm.
you know, I had everybody, so many friends and family members and coworkers and everyone reaching out and you know sending their thoughts and prayers, but
Mhm.
I needed to relate to people and connect with people that knew exactly what I was going through. So I fortunately found a grief group that was right, you know, very close to my house, where
Mhm.
it was you could basically say you're um, a child of a, or, you know, you have a lost a parent, and so I went into this group and I was super nervous to go into it and actually like didn't really want to go, but felt it was necessary for me to process. And it was the best thing that I ever did because immediately everyone in this group knew exactly what I was going through. They had all been there or were there at the exact same time, too. So, you know, more people came in where there are so many different phases of grief. And, you know, the ones that had been there forever were able to give me guidance and help me in a way that, you know, my friends or other family members couldn't do that, you know,
Sure.
and then those that I was connecting with that were starting you know, their same process. It was actually really interesting too, because like one of my reps lost her dad to cancer 3 months after me. So I was also that person for her. But having the community and having people that understand what you're experiencing was just invaluable for me.
Mhm. Yeah. You mentioned different phases of grief and having people around you that had been maybe in that phase or have experienced that phase to support. Um, and then you mentioned this rep. So it sounds like you had the opportunity also to kind of take over that role of like I've been where you are, and to help people through it. Did that happen outside of that rep? I mean, has that happened again? Has that happened since?
So I've had other friends, yes, I've had other
Hmm.
friends who have lost parents and been
Hmm.
able to be that person. Not as near, and I'm, you know, I'm now 4 years out, and
Hmm.
but I do, like, one of my best friends actually lost both of her parents within a year this last
Hmm.
year, like back to back, and
Wow.
so I've been able to help her in her process as well.
Hmm.
But I also, I mean, I think it's just if you understand and if you know, there's so much that you can offer to someone going
Hmm.
through that process that that are even, you know, beyond what they can read. And you know, I
Hmm.
definitely think that there's great books out there that helped, and one that helped me significantly. But just having people to just like vent and explain,
Hmm.
knowing that they know exactly what you're talking about was
Hmm.
just so helpful for me in my
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. I bet. And I guess in a weird way, it's almost the strength that you talked about Neil having over like the course of like a 7-8 year period. Sounds like you were able to develop some of that strength to then share with others. It sounds like a little bit of Neil working through his daughter a little bit to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, I talk about this a lot too. I really feel like my kids also helped with that so much
Hmm.
because they were so young. They were
Hmm.
3 years old. My daughter was 3, and my son was 9 months old.
Hmm.
And they had no idea. Like it was just a normal day. Everything was normal for
Mm.
them, and I had
Yeah.
to continue to be mom and be wife and all of that. But they gave me that kind of like, you know, the push that I need to just keep going.
Yeah. Hmm.
When I wanted to just curl up and be alone, seeing
Hmm.
them and knowing that they were depending on me and they didn't
Yeah.
understand, I think I'm just super thankful to have had them during that time, because
Sure.
they just reminded me, what is still here and what I'm living for, frankly. And I think it put a lot of things into perspective
Right.
as well.
That's super interesting. I mean, I'm thinking of you being a mom to two young kids and having gone through something like this. You're shouldering an incredibly heavy burden, but yet you were able to have the self awareness of kind of where you were and to figure out how to go find help and where you stumble onto that grief group. I mean, do you attribute that to having to be a mom to two young kids that were kind of unknowingly kind of pushing you there, or was there something else that kind of landed and you said, hey, I gotta go find some people that are like me?
A couple different things. So then also my mom. So
Mm,
my brother and I are super close, and he fortunately like made it out right before my dad passed. So he made it out to see him. He lives in the UK, and so I had to be that for my kids and for my mom.
mhm,
And I think it's just this role that you step into, and it's sort of the quote is like, grief is this nasty game of making you the weakest person, but creating the strongest like making you the weakest person, but creating the strongest person you'll ever be.
mhm,
And I truly believe that that is accurate, because I I had to be that for my kids, and then I had to be that for my mom, because she lost her best friend and, spouse of 46 years, and didn't know a life without him.
mhm,
And now
mhm.
she's having to like relearn what that looks like. So
Yeah.
when I think about, in a lot of ways too, I think the grief group was sort of me dealing with the with the grief, and then helping to create that strong like base for everyone else, for my kids and for my mom, and um, you know, just continue on. And it's not easy to do.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't sound easy playing a role that, uh, being a parent to two young kids in my life. I know how heavy that can be, just day to day,
Yeah,
and then also having to turn around and guide a parent to almost navigate a whole new world, like an unknown world. That sounds like a major, like, full time job.
absolutely. It definitely was.
Uh, do you feel like in having, well, let's call them two full time jobs there, um, were you able to leave or take some time off of your professional job, the one that pays you?
Yeah.
Were you able to do that to get away to rest and to grieve and to help, or did you need to jump right back in?
So there's two parts of that, two answers to that question. Number one, I was given the space and time that I needed, which I'm
Mm,
super fortunate for. And my manager at the time was very, very understanding. My team was very, uh,
mhm,
just really supportive during that process. But the other thing that I found is, thinking back about being that strong person, and also thinking about what my dad would have wanted. At
mm,
that point, I could not stay home and be around it all. I had to keep moving, and work offered a very welcome
mm,
distraction for that,
yeah.
for me to sort of put my head down and keep me occupied during the day.
Mhm,
Uh, Otherwise, I mean, I could sit around and, you know, be devastated all day long.
mhm,
Uh, but knowing that there were people that were depending on me at home at the end of the day, that allowed me to just be distracted for a good chunk of the day,
Hmm.
knowing that when I would get home that, it's the second job and they would also keep me on my toes. So
Sure. Sure.
I was offered, time, like I think generally speaking, as we know, and as you know, not enough by any means, but
Sure.
I was lucky in that my manager, gave me the flexibility and allowed me to take the time that I needed.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. That shows up um, as a pretty critical element. It seems like
Yeah,
for uh, for people who are working that experience a loss, that time, both time and the distraction, like it's sometimes equal weight. Um, and a lot of people say things like, hey, the 2 weeks was great, and I loved being able to get back, but then I needed some time later, right?
yeah,
Because I think you said in that quote, I think you said grief is gnarly. Pops up in goofy places and in goofy ways sometimes that can still be debilitating very far from the actual event.
absolutely. I think so. It was also interesting that the policy was the same for if I lost my second or third cousin as it
Mm-hmm.
was if I lost my direct parent, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
is a problem because those
Mm-hmm.
are very different.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
and as you said, like there would be moments where I would be at my desk and lose it, just
Mm-hmm.
absolutely lose it. So think about now today, we're
Mm-hmm.
mostly working from home, so you have the ability to do that in the privacy of your own home. But I was on
Sure.
a dance floor
Oh
and
yeah.
would just get very emotional
Mm-hmm.
and literally lose it. And everyone was great about asking.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were just the times where it was like, this isn't the day for you to ask me. And,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't know. And I'm
Sure.
thankful for that. But yeah, that's a thing too, is just being on a client call.
Mm-hmm.
And there were moments, there were times I said this to a friend too, where when I thought about the fact that I would never see him again,
Mm-hmm.
it literally takes my breath away. It would make me stop breathing. Like I just thinking through that, because
Yeah.
I went to school away from home. I lived out in California away from home for a while. So there were many moments where I wouldn't see my parents for months. And so
Mm-hmm.
at first, it kind of felt like that. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just a break, I'm gonna
Sure.
see them again.
Sure.
And then thinking and truly internalizing that I'm never gonna see him again.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. You talked a little bit about the support that you were given professionally, but you also mentioned when we were talking a little bit about the personal and the professional community, right? And I think about the people that were good about asking, didn't know when to ask, and I feel like a lot of people have, and I know I'm guilty of this. An event happens, you show up for the first couple of weeks, you check in a little bit, and then for the most part, life kind of goes back to normal for like the support group, right?
Yeah.
Um, uh, was there anything that stood out about the support that you felt like you wanted or didn't want? As the maybe let's just call it like the first year went on.
Yeah. So one thing, just to go back to kind of the professional piece, I forgot to
Yeah.
mention this. When I got up at my dad's funeral
Hmm.
and we were leaving, there was the entire back section was members of my team.
Oh wow.
So then, I got to see each of them as they were leaving. That was
Hmm.
massive. Um,
Hmm.
but throughout the year, I think that there was, sorry, can you hear my dog
A little
snoring?
bit.
He's
Yeah, it's all right.
really
He's
loud.
taking a nice nap. That's good.
There were like I would get check-ins pretty regularly and then
Hmm.
they would stop. And I
Hmm.
think that was an interesting thing to observe
Hmm.
because, like a month, 2 months would get the check-ins, and then there was a point in time where they just kind of stopped.
Hmm.
And so this is something that I've tried to be mindful of with others too now, if I know someone's checking in. But I found that to be kind of interesting because there's no rule book on, okay, it's been 7 months, you shouldn't contact them,
Sure.
and
Sure.
there were things like birthdays and
Hmm.
Father's Day and all of the holidays. I mean, that those were all really, really hard. And I would say that Christmas 2019 was my first, that was like 1 year and my first Christmas without him. And that was probably the worst. Like it was awful. And I I I would say that, I didn't have as much as I needed then in retrospect.
Hmm.
I was
Sure.
like in a very dark place at that point.
Hmm. Yeah. And
Because it
you're
all,
talking just under a year later or so, right?
yeah. So
Yeah.
it would have been like the anniversary of December of 2018
Right.
was the beginning of the end.
Right.
That's when
Right.
he went into to MD Anderson and then was sent home because he was too sick to get
Hmm.
treatment, went back to the hospital and never came back.
Hmm.
So December was really tough. And then Christmas and then that 1 year mark was also
Hmm.
just wow. How did that happen? How did a year go by?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
It's
I think that like so that's something too, I think, when I'm thinking about like resources and things for others is
hmm.
like thinking about those things because
Hmm.
people were really good about checking in immediately, but then
Hmm.
all of the holidays after, like
Hmm.
that's when it
Yeah.
really hurts, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I had a friend kind of reference it as like when the food stops coming. It's
Yeah,
like it's not really just the food, but it's about the support.
totally.
And I think he said like, hey, like life just kept going for everybody else, and for him it just kind of stopped when
Yep.
he lost his mom. And that was a tough thing to see. Um, One of the things that came out of that though is that he is very cognizant now
Yeah.
of the situation that his friends are in, and it sounds like you have almost kind of taken that same pursuit of supporting people in your life that have suffered losses as kind of like uh, their buddy, their grief buddy, or their, however you want to refer to it, but somebody who's comes in to give them strength on a regular basis.
Yeah. And I'll say, candidly, I can be better at this.
Sure.
I can definitely be better. And
We all
it's
can. Sure.
something I think, moving forward, um, I'll make a point to do. But
Hmm.
I know like the points of time when things are going to be more difficult.
Hmm.
And it will be easy for someone to forget, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah.
Um, and just to know that you have somebody that also same thing, like knows what you've been through, can relate, is really, really important.
Yeah. You mentioned something super cool to me about seeing your dad through your kids.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So my dad, like I said, he's a big guy.
Hmm.
When he was younger, he was like smallest kid in his class,
Hmm.
smallest kid always, and then
Hmm.
shot up and got like huge. He My dad also was like olive skin and would go outside for a few minutes and get like super tan.
Hmm.
And I have this picture of my son and my dad around the same age when they're babies, and it's like a spitting image. They're the exact
Wow.
same baby. I should send it to you. But um also my son right now, he's got olive skin. My daughter's got he's got olive skin and like dirty brown hair, dirty blonde hair,
Hmm.
light brown, and goes outside and gets tan immediately. My daughter has red hair, fair skin. But he, everyone, like my dad's family, they see him and they're like, he is Neil. He's Neil. He is
Hmm.
exactly the same build. He walks the same. He walks and like carries his arms like this on his side, just like my dad did.
Hmm.
And the other thing that was so crazy so he shares my dad's middle name. My dad, my brother, and my nephew, and my son all have the same last name, or same middle name. Sorry, same middle name, which is a family name on his side. But um, so when he was a baby, when my son was a baby, and my dad was still here, he would light up when my dad would come in the room. Like they just had a crazy connection, and I just see so much of him in my son. And I feel like, that's one of those things where like, okay, like he was brought here to help me in my process.
Sure.
And
sure.
like I do get like really sad and angry when I think about him not being able to see him like that. When I think about that, that's one of those like gut punches too.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
he would like both of them really, but
Yeah.
if you could see this little like carbon copy, I mean that's like pretty painful. But I also like try to think that he's always with us, and he does like see it. It's just like that's one of the more like painful things, is like not being able to be a part of their lives now,
Sure. Totally. Has your son, like, does your son know that people say that about him? Does your son realize that image is so close?
Yeah, he's 5, so we tell him, and he talks about him a lot, which is great. I mean, we talk about him a lot. We keep him as a very active part of our conversations. I don't think he fully understands it yet, but as we continue and I show him, the picture of him and my dad as babies next to each other, where they're literally the same person, it'll sink in a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. You said something interesting there about keeping him active and keeping Neil active in conversations and talking about him a lot. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, the cardinal represents lost loved ones, and we've got a bird feeder like in the backyard that you can see from the dining room. And so anytime a cardinal's there, my son's like, G-Paw's here. He's here. G-Paw's here. Like, let's go out and see G-Paw.
Oh, that's awesome.
But he asks too. Like, we will tell him stories, and he will ask questions, and he's super curious. Same with my daughter too. My dad was a master gardener. And this is the other like kind of crazy thing. When we bought this house, when we first moved here, when we pulled up, I went to the backyard, and the first thing I saw was there were 3 raised garden beds. And my dad, we were in the process of putting them in our backyard back in Austin. And my dad was a master gardener. He taught kids how to garden. He was super passionate about it. So my daughter has also been really, really passionate about gardening, and feels like that's her connection to him as well. And I'll never forget one day we had some carrots. We grew carrots, and she pulled the carrots out of the bed, and she looked up at the sky, and she's like, G-Pa, look what we made. It's like awesome, like it's just really cool, because I want them to know of him. He is an amazing person, and like the legacy truly does live on,
Yeah. Yeah. And you just used the word legacy, and you use that as we were talking before, and you said something to the effect of like your legacy truly matters, is something that you learned through this process.
Yeah.
What exactly does that mean to you?
So I think about the number of people that came to his celebration from all over the country, across the world. The number of people that called in to say their last and final words to him as he was, in his final hours. The number of messages I got. I mean, he had an incredible impact on so many people. He was a company commander and commanding officer in the Marine Corps, responsible for 500 Marines. He was an incredible leader, incredible confidant. Like he really did have an impact. And I loved that actually, like hearing and seeing everyone come from all over, just reminded me of, just how special he was. And, these are things now that at the end of the day, when I'm gone, like I want people to feel that same way about me. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like it's, it, it's just really, it's super special.
Yeah.
And, I still to this day like get stories about him and people reaching out. One of his high school friends reached out to me on Facebook. I like don't use Facebook that often, but I
Mhm.
get this message from him and he's like, "Let me tell you all about your dad." And he's like
Oh,
writing
wow.
me these stories about him, and it's just cool, and it's
Yeah.
just supports exactly what we knew, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. That's amazing. We'll I'll try to be a little bit more like Neil walking out of this for sure.
Yeah,
Uh,
totally.
uh, is there anything, Lindsey, as you know, from like the community aspect, whether it's people who are grieving, have suffered a loss, or kind of that first layer of support, the things that you've been through, the things that you've experienced and learned. Is there anything that you haven't mentioned that you want to make sure you mention today that might be important for those folks?
Yeah, the biggest thing is it's okay to not be okay.
Hmm.
It is absolutely okay. Um, I think there's that, oh, they're in a better place now,
Hmm.
which like no, they're not. I would rather
Hmm.
them be here, and I'm not
Hmm.
okay, and
Hmm.
it's going to take me
Hmm.
time. It's going to take,
Hmm.
anyone going through the process, it's going to take time,
Hmm.
and it does get better. It does get easier. I will never not miss my father, like for the rest
Sure.
of my life. Like that's
Sure.
never going to go away.
Sure.
But you learn how to, to deal with it.
Hmm.
But it takes time. And
Hmm.
so, for anyone else going through it, find your crew, find the grief group. I think that's truly game changing. And and I did it for a long time. And then I got to the point where I was like, okay, I think that it served its purpose and I still kept in touch and still keep in touch with some of the people from that group, which is great.
Hmm.
But I would say lean into other communities where people know what you're going through
Hmm. Hmm.
because you can't
Yeah.
understand and you can't imagine it until you're there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I
Wow.
really feel like that whole process, like
Hmm.
his final days, like felt like a bad dream,
Hmm.
And then I was just
Hmm.
like, nope, I'm not waking up from this. Like
Right.
this is like the new norm. Here's where we
Right.
are.
Right. Wow. Well, powerful story. Obviously, Neil is a powerful guy, and the fact that he lives on through obviously you, lives on through your kids, lives on through a lot of the people that he touched and the stories that are out there, truly speaks to the importance of legacy, like you suggested. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing your story. Thanks for sharing about Neil, and really appreciate it. Grateful for your friendship and support of this community.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do it.